The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Miami-Dade County Courthouse as 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez walked slowly down the marble corridor, her tiny hand gripping her mother's fingers with desperate intensity. In her other arm, she clutched Mr. Bunny, a worn stuffed rabbit with one ear missing and patches of fur rubbed smooth from countless nights of comfort. The rabbit had been her constant companion for 3 months now, ever since that terrible night that had stolen her voice and shattered her innocence. Maria Rodriguez watched her daughter with a mother's heartbreak, seeing the hollow look in Emma's once bright eyes. Before the attack, Emma had been a chatterbox, filling their small apartment with endless questions about butterflies, dinosaurs, and why the sky was blue. She would sing Disney songs while helping her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, tend to their tiny garden. Now, the silence that surrounded Emma was deafening, broken only by the soft shuffle of her patent leather shoes against the courthouse floor. The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 7 loomed ahead like the entrance to a nightmare. Maria felt Emma's grip tighten as they approached, her daughter's breathing becoming rapid and shallow. 3 months of therapy sessions, doctor visits, and sleepless nights had led to this moment. Emma was the only witness to the brutal home invasion that had left Abuela Rosa fighting for her life in the hospital for 6 weeks. Without her testimony, the monster who had destroyed their family would walk free. As they entered the packed courtroom, Emma's eyes darted nervously around the intimidating space. The judge's bench towered above them like a mountain, while rows of spectators filled the gallery. Reporters clutched their notepads and cameras, hungry for a story. Victim advocates whispered among themselves, having seen too many cases fall apart when traumatized witnesses couldn't find their voices. The weight of expectation pressed down on Emma's small shoulders like a crushing burden. Prosecutor James Mitchell, a veteran of the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office, reviewed his notes one final time. At 45, he had prosecuted hundreds of violent crimes, but this case had consumed him for months. Vincent Cruz wasn't just another criminal. He was a predator who specialized in targeting elderly victims in their homes. Emma was their only hope of putting him away forever. Mitchell had spent countless hours with child psychologists, learning techniques to help traumatized witnesses, but Emma remained locked in silence. At the defense table, attorney Catherine Wells arranged her papers with confident precision. At 38, she had built her reputation defending the indefensible, and Vincent Cruz was paying her well to ensure his freedom. She glanced at her client with professional detachment. Cruz sat motionless, his dark eyes scanning the courtroom with the cold calculation of a predator assessing his territory. His expensive suit couldn't hide the menacing aura that surrounded him like a dark cloud. Judge Patricia Martinez called the court to order, her voice echoing through the chamber. At 52, she had presided over countless difficult cases, but child witnesses always tested her patience and compassion. She looked down at Emma with gentle eyes, understanding the enormous burden placed on such small shoulders. The legal system demanded testimony, but humanity demanded protection of the innocent. Emma's court-appointed victim advocate, Dr. Susan Chun, had prepared extensively for this moment. A child psychologist with 15 years of experience, she had worked with dozens of traumatized children. Emma's case was particularly challenging because the trauma had triggered selective mutism, a condition where psychological stress prevents speech despite the physical ability to talk. Dr. Chun sat in the front row, ready to intervene if Emma became too distressed. The gallery buzzed with nervous energy as family members, reporters, and courthouse staff witnessed what everyone hoped would be a breakthrough moment. Abuela Rosa sat in her wheelchair, still recovering from her injuries, but determined to see justice served. Her weathered hands trembled as she watched her beloved granddaughter approach the witness stand. The attack had left Rosa with broken ribs, a fractured skull, and nightmares that haunted her sleep. But her greatest pain came from watching Emma's silence. Detective Miguel Santos, the lead investigator on the case, watched from the back of the courtroom with growing anxiety. He had spent months building a circumstantial case against Cruz, but without Emma's eyewitness testimony, reasonable doubt would set the predator free. Santos had daughters of his own and understood the delicate balance between seeking justice and protecting a child's well-being. As Emma was sworn in, her voice was expected for the oath, but only silence greeted the court reporters expectant. Fingers. Judge Martinez gently modified the procedure, allowing Emma to nod her responses to the preliminary questions. The courtroom held its collective breath as Prosecutor Mitchell approached the witness stand with the gentleness of a man approaching a frightened bird. Mitchell's first questions were simple, designed to ease Emma into testimony. "Can you tell?" "Use your name, sweetheart." Silence. "Do you remember the night your grandmother was hurt?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, but no words came. Mitchell had prepared for this possibility, but the reality of facing a mute witness still shocked him. The defense attorney's subtle smile didn't go unnoticed. The morning stretched into afternoon as various techniques were attempted. Picture cards showing the events, gentle encouragement from Dr. Chun, even a brief recess where Emma could speak. Privately with her mother, nothing worked. The trauma had built walls around Emma's voice that seemed impenetrable. Mitchell's desperation grew with each passing hour, knowing that justice for the Rodriguez family slipped further away with Emma's continued silence. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, Judge Martinez faced a difficult decision. The prosecution had built their case around Emma's testimony, but legal precedent demanded that witnesses must actually testify to be effective. The weight of the moment settled over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. Everyone understood that tomorrow might be their last chance to reach the frightened little girl who held the key to justice in her trembling hands. Vincent Cruz watched it all with the patience of a hunter, knowing that time was on his side. Emma's silence was his freedom, and freedom meant the opportunity to hurt other families. The stakes couldn't be higher, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. The third day of testimony dawned gray and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over the Rodriguez family. Emma sat at the kitchen table of their small apartment, mechanically eating cereal while staring at nothing. Maria watched, her daughter with growing despair, noting how Emma had lost weight over the past months. The vibrant little girl who once danced around their kitchen was now a shadow of her former self, moving through life like a ghost. Dr. Susan Chun arrived early that morning, carrying a new bag of therapeutic tools she hoped might break through Emma's silence. Over the weekend, she had consulted with colleagues across the country, searching for any technique that might reach the traumatized child. The bag contained art supplies, puppet therapy materials, and even a tablet loaded with communication. Apps designed for non-verbal children. Despite her professional optimism, Dr. Chun privately worried that Emma's selective mutism had become too deeply entrenched. At the courthouse, Prosecutor Mitchell paced his office like a caged animal. His desk was cluttered with case files, psychological reports, and empty coffee cups, evidence of his sleepless nights spent strategizing. His colleague, Assistant District Attorney Linda Torres, watched him with concern. In her 20 years of prosecution, she had never seen Mitchell this consumed by a case. The weight of potential failure was eating him alive. "We've tried everything, James," Torres said gently. "Maybe it's time to consider that Emma simply can't testify. We could pursue other avenues, build a circumstantial case without her." Mitchell stopped pacing and fixed her with an intense stare. "You saw the crime scene photos, Linda. You know what that monster did to that innocent old woman. Emma is our only path to justice. Without her testimony, Cruz walks free to terrorize another." family. Meanwhile, in the courthouse cafeteria, defense attorney Catherine Wells sat across from her client, Vincent Cruz, reviewing their strategy over coffee. Cruz maintained the facade of an innocent man wrongly accused, but Wells wasn't fooled. She had defended enough criminals to recognize a predator when she saw one. Still, her job was to provide the best possible defense, regardless of her personal feelings. "The kid's not talking," Cruz said with barely concealed satisfaction. "Looks like your expensive fees are paying off after all." Wells studied her client's cold eyes, fighting back disgust. "Don't celebrate yet. Mitchell is desperate, and desperate prosecutors can be dangerous. He might try something unconventional." Cruz leaned back in his chair, supremely confident. "What's he going to do? Force an 8-year-old to talk? The system protects kids, remember? Their precious ethics will be my freedom." In courtroom 7, the morning session began with palpable tension. The gallery was packed with an unusual mix of spectators, victim rights advocates, court watchers, and reporters who sensed this case might set important precedents for child witnesses. The previous 2 days had generated significant media attention, with headlines questioning whether the legal system adequately protected both victims and the accused when child witnesses were involved. Judge Martinez took her place with obvious reluctance. She had spent the previous evening researching case law, trying to find precedents that might allow for alternative forms of testimony. The legal system demanded verbal testimony under oath, but humanity demanded protection of traumatized children. The conflict between law and compassion weighed heavily on her judicial conscience. Emma entered the courtroom clinging to Mr. Bunny with one hand and her mother's fingers with the other. Her steps were even slower than the previous days, and dark circles under her eyes suggested nightmares continued to plague her sleep. Dr. Chun followed closely, carrying her new bag of tools with diminishing hope. As Emma was helped into the witness chair, the courtroom fell into respectful silence. Everyone present understood they were witnessing either a breakthrough moment or the collapse of justice. The stakes had never been clearer. This little girl's voice was the key to who? Preventing future victims. Prosecutor Mitchell approached the witness stand with a new strategy. Instead of direct questions about the crime, he began with Emma's life before the attack. He showed her pictures of happy moments, birthday parties, school events, family gatherings. The courtroom watched hopefully as Emma's eyes showed brief flickers of recognition, but still no words came. Dr. Chun was called forward to try art therapy. She placed paper and crayons before Emma, encouraging her to draw what she remembered. Emma picked up a black crayon and began drawing furiously, dark, violent scribbles that filled the paper with obvious distress. The drawing was entered as evidence, but drawings couldn't provide the detailed testimony needed for conviction. The puppet therapy attempt proved equally frustrating. Emma engaged with the puppets, moving them around the small stage Dr. Chun had set up, but her stories remained locked inside her traumatized mind. The courtroom watched in painful silence as each technique failed to unlock Emma's voice. By lunch recess, defeat hung heavy in the air. Abuela Rosa, still weak from her injuries, wept quietly in her wheelchair. The sight of her granddaughter's continued suffering was almost unbearable. She blamed herself for the attack, for not being stronger, for not protecting Emma from witnessing such horror. Detective Santos cornered Mitchell during the break, his frustration evident. "We're running out of options, counselor. The judge won't allow this to continue indefinitely. Cruz's attorney is already filing motions for dismissal." Mitchell's response was barely controlled anger. That predator destroyed this family and traumatized that little girl into silence. There has to be a way to reach her. We just haven't found it yet. As the afternoon session began, a new sense of urgency filled the courtroom. Everyone understood that time was running out. Emma sat in the witness chair, smaller than ever, while the weight of the legal system pressed down around her. Her silence had become a prison, not just for her, but for everyone seeking justice. The clock ticked toward what everyone feared might be the final attempt to reach the broken child who held their only hope for justice. The afternoon session was scheduled to be Prosecutor Mitchell's final attempt with Emma. He sat at his table, hands clasped tightly together, prayer and desperation warring in his mind. His closing arguments were already prepared, not for the case against Vincent Cruz, but for the inevitable motion to dismiss that defense attorney Wells would file within the hour. 3 days of silence had pushed them to the breaking point. Emma remained motionless in the witness chair, Miss Chobani, clutched against her chest like armor. Her dark eyes stared at nothing, lost in a world where monsters wore human faces and safety was just a memory. Dr. Chun had exhausted her arsenal of therapeutic techniques, and even she was beginning to accept that some traumas cut too deep for conventional healing. Judge Martinez glanced at the courtroom clock with growing frustration. Court time was precious, and she had other cases waiting. More importantly, putting Emma through continued stress without results bordered on cruel. The judge's maternal instincts warred with her judicial responsibilities as she prepared to make the difficult decision that would likely set Vincent Cruz free. Outside in the courthouse corridors, Miami-Dade police officer Sarah Kim was having the worst day of her 5-year career. What started as a routine morning had exploded into chaos when a suspicious package was discovered at the federal building 3 blocks away. The bomb squad had been called, buildings evacuated, and K-9 units deployed throughout the area. Officer Kim and her partner, Duke, had spent 4 grueling hours helping clear the federal building before the package was determined to be a hoax. A cruel prank that had cost the city thousands in resources and manpower. Duke, a 3-year-old German Shepherd with an impeccable service record, was exhausted but alert. His powerful frame carried him with the confidence of a dog who had never failed in his duties. Trained in both drug detection and explosive detection, Duke had helped solve dozens of cases and was considered one of the department's most reliable canine officers. His amber eyes missed nothing as they moved through the courthouse corridors, his keen senses still processing residual stress chemicals from their morning ordeal. Officer Kim was frustrated and running behind schedule. She needed to file her incident report from the false alarm, but Duke required his mandatory post-incident medical check first. The courthouse had been their planned route to the veterinary clinic when everything went sideways with the bomb threat. Now, exhausted and stressed, she was trying to navigate the maze of courthouse corridors, while Duke's training kept him alert to every sight, sound, and smell around them. As they passed courtroom 7, something extraordinary happened. Duke, who had been walking obediently at Officer Kim's side, suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His ears perked forward, and his entire body language shifted from routine patrol mode to something far more intense. The highly trained police dog began pulling toward the courtroom doors with unprecedented determination. "Duke, heel," Officer Kim commanded, confused by her partner's sudden behavioral change. Duke was known for his discipline and had never broken protocol like this. But the dog seemed driven by an instinct that transcended training. His whines were soft but urgent, unlike anything Kim had heard from him before. Inside the courtroom, Prosecutor Mitchell was making his final plea to Emma. "Sweetheart, I know this is scary, but your grandmother needs you to be brave. She needs you to tell us what happened that night." His voice carried the weight of desperation that everyone in the room could feel. Emma's response was the same hollow silence that had greeted every previous attempt. Maria Rodriguez watched from the gallery, her own heart breaking as she witnessed her daughter's continued imprisonment and trauma. Abuela Rosa, despite her physical pain, leaned forward in her wheelchair, silently willing her beloved granddaughter to find her voice. The commotion outside began as a subtle distraction. Court security guard Mike Torres first noticed Officer Kim struggling with her canine partner in the hallway. Duke's insistence on approaching the courtroom was causing a scene that couldn't be ignored. Torres approached to offer assistance, but Duke's behavior only intensified. "Ma'am, you need to control your dog," Torres said professionally. "We have sensitive proceedings in session." Officer Kim was mortified. "I'm sorry, he's never acted like this before." "Duke, come." But Duke seemed possessed by a mission that no amount of training could override. His powerful body strained against his leash as he focused entirely on the courtroom doors. Inside, Judge Martinez was losing patience with the disruption she could hear building outside. The murmur of voices and what sounded like an animal in distress was exactly the kind of chaos her courtroom didn't need. She was about to call a recess when the courtroom doors suddenly burst open. Officer Kim stumbled through the entrance, still being pulled by Duke's relentless determination. Her face was flushed with embarrassment as she found herself in the middle of legal proceedings with a police dog who had apparently lost his mind. "Your Honor, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's gotten into him." Defense Attorney Wells immediately jumped to her feet, sensing an opportunity. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. I object to this disruption of our proceedings." But her words were lost in the collective gasp that rippled through the courtroom. Duke had broken free from his handler's grip and was moving with purpose. Toward the waist was a delicate situation requiring careful approach. Every eye in the courtroom followed the magnificent animal as he approached the small girl who hadn't spoken in 3 months. Emma, who had shown no reaction to anything for days, slowly lifted her head. For the first time since entering the courtroom, her eyes focused on something in the present moment. Something about Duke's calm, steady presence seemed to penetrate the walls of trauma that had surrounded her. The courtroom held its collective breath, sensing that something profound was about to unfold. The courtroom existed in a bubble of suspended time as Duke approached Emma's witness chair. The massive German shepherd moved with the calculated grace of a predator, yet his intentions radiated nothing but gentleness. His amber eyes, wise beyond his 3 years, locked onto Emma's face with an intensity that seemed to peer directly into her wounded soul. Every person in the packed courtroom leaned forward unconsciously, sensing they were witnessing something that would change everything. Emma's grip on Mr. Bunny loosened for the first time in months. Her small fingers, which had clutched the stuffed rabbit like a lifeline through countless sleepless nights, began to relax as Duke positioned himself beside the witness stand. The dog's massive head was level with Emma's seated position, and his presence seemed to create an invisible shield around the traumatized child. Officer Kim stood frozen near the courtroom doors, her training warring with maternal instinct as she watched her partner work what could only be described as magic. Judge Martinez found herself torn between maintaining courtroom order and allowing this unprecedented interaction to continue. In her 23 years on the bench, she had never witnessed anything like this. Duke's behavior defied every protocol and procedure, yet something in the dog's demeanor suggested this was exactly where he needed to be. The judge's hand hovered over her gavel, but she couldn't bring herself to interrupt what felt like a sacred moment. Prosecutor Mitchell watched with barely contained hope as Emma's posture began to change. The rigid defensive position she had maintained for 3 days was slowly melting away. Her shoulders dropped from their hunched position, and her breathing, which had been shallow and rapid throughout her ordeal, began to deepen and slow. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Emma looked truly present in the moment. Vincent Cruz, seated at the defense table, felt the first cold fingers of real fear creeping up his spine. He had been so confident in his victim's silence. so certain that trauma would be his shield against justice. But something about the way Emma was responding to the police dog sent alarm bells ringing in his predatory mind. Defense attorney Wells noticed her client's sudden tension and felt her own confidence beginning to waver. Duke, with the patience of a saint, allowed Emma to study his face. The dog's amber eyes held depths of wisdom that seemed impossible for an animal, yet everyone in the courtroom could see the intelligence and compassion radiating from his steady gaze. His breathing was calm and measured, creating a rhythm that Emma unconsciously began to match. The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma slowly, tentatively, reached out her small hand toward Duke's massive head. The moment Emma's fingers made contact with Duke's soft fur, electricity seemed to course through the room. Her touch was feather-light at first, as if she expected the dog to disappear like a dream. But Duke remained perfectly still, his warm presence as solid and reliable as bedrock. Emma's eyes, which had been vacant and distant for so long, suddenly blazed with life and recognition. Maria Rodriguez gripped the gallery railing so tightly, her knuckles turned white. 3 months of watching her daughter exist in a world of shadows and silence had prepared her for disappointment, but the transformation happening before her eyes was nothing short of miraculous. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Emma's hand stroke Duke's head with growing confidence. Dr. Chung frantically scribbled notes, her clinical mind trying to process what she was witnessing. In all her years of working with traumatized children, she had never seen such an immediate and profound response to therapeutic intervention. Duke wasn't just a dog in this moment. He was a bridge between Emma's fractured world and the healing she desperately needed. Then it happened. Emma's lips parted, and for the first time in 3 months, sound emerged. Her voice was barely above a whisper, rusty from disuse, but clear enough for the entire silent courtroom to hear. "Good boy." The simple words hit the packed room like a thunderbolt. Court reporter Janet Murphy's fingers trembled over her keys as she recorded the first words from the silent witness. But Emma wasn't finished. With Duke's steady presence anchoring her to the present moment, she found strength she didn't know still existed within her shattered psyche. Her voice grew slightly stronger as she continued, "You have kind eyes, not scary eyes." The courtroom erupted in barely suppressed gasps as people realized they were witnessing the breakthrough everyone had prayed for. Vincent Cruz felt his world beginning to crumble as Emma's voice gained confidence. The silence that had been his protection was evaporating before his eyes, replaced by the clear, honest words of the child he had tried so hard to terrorize into permanent silence. His hands began to shake as he realized his carefully constructed web of intimidation was unraveling. Emma's next words would haunt Cruz for the rest of his life. Still stroking Duke's head, she looked directly at the man who had destroyed her family's peace. Her voice, though still small, carried the weight of absolute truth as she pointed at Duke and then at her attacker. "His eyes are good and safe," she said, her gaze never wavering from Cruz's face. "That man's eyes are mean and scary, just like that night." The courtroom exploded into barely controlled chaos as the implications of Emma's words sank in. Defense attorney Wells shot to her feet, shouting objections that were lost in the roar of whispered conversations and emotional reactions from the gallery. Prosecutor Mitchell felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he realized Emma was finally ready to tell her story. Judge Martinez slammed her gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but her own eyes were bright with unshed tears. Justice, which had seemed so elusive just moments before, was finally within reach. Emma had found her voice, and with it, she would find her power to ensure that the monster who had hurt her family would never hurt anyone again. Duke remained perfectly still throughout the chaos, his wise eyes never leaving Emma's face, as if he understood that his job was far from over. With Duke's massive frame pressed protectively against the witness stand, Emma Rodriguez began to speak with a clarity that stunned everyone in the courtroom. Her voice, though still small and sometimes trembling, carried the unmistakable ring of truth that penetrated every corner of the packed chamber. 3 months of enforced silence had not diminished the vivid details burned into her 8-year-old memory. If anything, the trauma had crystallized every horrific moment with devastating precision. "I was bringing Abuela Rosa her book back," Emma began, her small hand never leaving Duke's soft fur. The physical connection to the police dog seemed to anchor her to the present moment, preventing her from being swept away by the nightmare she was finally ready to share. It was the one about the butterfly garden that she read to me every night. I wanted to surprise her before bedtime. Prosecutor Mitchell approached the witness stand with careful steps, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter this miraculous breakthrough. His years of experience with traumatized witnesses told him to proceed gently, to let Emma tell her story at her own pace. Behind him, the courtroom had fallen into absolute silence. Even the court reporter's keyboard seemed muted as everyone strained to hear every precious word. When I got to Abuela's house, the front door was open. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each sentence. "That was wrong. Abuela always locked her door at night because she said Miami could be dangerous for old ladies living alone. I got scared, but I thought maybe she forgot because she was getting old and sometimes forgot things." Duke seemed to sense when Emma's breathing quickened with anxiety, and he would shift slightly, pressing closer to offer comfort. The bond between the traumatized child and the police dog was so profound that it transcended species. They communicated in a language of trust and healing that amazed everyone watching. "I went inside to check on her," Emma said, her dark eyes focused on Duke's amber ones as if drawing strength from their depths. "I called her name, but she didn't answer. Then I heard scary noises from her bedroom, banging and crashing, and Abuela was crying. She was crying and saying, 'Please stop,' over and over." Maria Rodriguez covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face as she finally heard the details of the night that had destroyed their peaceful family life. Abuela Rosa, despite her physical pain, leaned forward in her wheelchair, her weathered hands gripping the armrests as she listened to her granddaughter's testimony. Defense attorney Catherine Wells watched her carefully constructed defense strategy crumble with every word from Emma's lips. She had built Vincent Cruz's entire case around the assumption that the only witness would remain silent. Now faced with clear, detailed testimony, she frantically scribbled notes while searching for any angle that might cast doubt on a child's memory. "I was too scared to go to her room," Emma admitted, shame coloring her young voice. "I hid in the coat closet by the front door, but I left the door open just a crack so I could see. I wanted to help Abuela, but I was just a little kid, and I was so scared." Dr. Chun felt her professional training warring with maternal instinct as she listened to Emma's account. The child's ability to recall such specific details despite her trauma was remarkable, but the emotional cost of reliving these memories was evident in every tremor of her voice. Emma's testimony continued with devastating precision. "The bad man came out of Abuela's room, carrying her jewelry box, the pretty wooden one with a dancing ballerina inside. His hands were covered in something dark, and he smelled like cigarettes and something else, something mean and angry. Vincent." Cruz felt sweat beading on his forehead as Emma's description hit uncomfortably close to home. He had indeed been a heavy smoker at the time of the attack, and his distinctive aftershave had been noted in police reports from previous victims. His attorney shot him a warning look, but Cruz was struggling to maintain his facade of innocence. "He was tall and had a scar right here," Emma said, touching her own cheek to indicate the location. It was shaped like a crescent moon, and it was shiny and white against his dark skin. His eyes were the worst part. They were cold and empty, like a snake's eyes, not like Duke's eyes. Duke's eyes are warm and safe. The courtroom hung on every word as Emma described the attacker's clothing, his mannerisms, even the way he walked with a slight limp that favored his left leg. Every detail she provided matched the police reports and witness descriptions from Cruz's previous crimes, building an overwhelming case of identification that no defense attorney could easily dismiss. "He hurt Abuela really bad," Emma continued, her voice breaking slightly. I could hear her crying and asking God to help her. I wanted to run and get help, but I was frozen in that closet, like my feet were stuck in cement. I was too scared to move, too scared to breathe. Detective Miguel Santos, watching from the back of the courtroom, felt a mixture of admiration and heartbreak as he listened to Emma's account. Her description of the crime scene matched his investigation perfectly, down to details that had never been released to the public. This wasn't false memory or suggestion. This was genuine eyewitness testimony of the highest caliber. Then the worst part happened, Emma said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Duke seemed to sense her increased distress, and moved even closer, his warm presence a constant reminder that she was safe now. The bad man saw me watching through the closet door. His scary snake eyes looked right at me, and he smiled the meanest smile I ever saw. He walked over to my hiding place and opened the door. The courtroom held its collective breath, knowing they were about to hear the moment that had stolen Emma's voice and shattered her innocence forever. Emma's voice grew steadier as she approached the most terrifying part of her testimony, Duke's unwavering presence giving her courage she never knew she possessed. The massive German shepherd seemed to understand that this was the crucial moment, positioning himself so that his warm body created a protective barrier between Emma and the rest of the courtroom. His amber eyes never left her face, offering silent encouragement as she prepared to relive her worst nightmare. When the bad man opened the closet door, I thought I was going to die, Emma said, her small hand gripping Duke's fur like a lifeline. He grabbed my arm really tight, so tight it left bruises that lasted for weeks. His fingers were still wet with Abuela's blood, and he smeared it on my sleeve. The detail sent collective shivers through the courtroom, and several jurors visibly paled at the child's matter-of-fact description of such horror. Vincent Cruz felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack as Emma's testimony painted an increasingly detailed picture of his crimes. Every specific detail she provided was another nail in his coffin, and he could see his attorney's growing desperation in her frantic note-taking. The confidence that had sustained him through 3 days of Emma's silence was evaporating like morning mist under the harsh light of truth. He leaned down really close to my face, Emma continued, unconsciously leaning closer to Duke for comfort. His breath smelled like cigarettes and beer, and his voice was like a snake hissing when he whispered to me. He said, "If you ever tell anyone what you saw here, little girl, I'll come back and hurt your mama, just like I hurt your grandma. Maybe worse." Defense attorney Catherine Wells felt her heart sinking as Emma's testimony revealed the calculated cruelty of her clients' actions. This wasn't just a burglary gone wrong. This was the behavior of a predator who understood exactly how to manipulate and terrorize his victims. The psychological warfare Cruz had waged against an 8-year-old child was becoming crystal clear to everyone in the courtroom. Prosecutor Mitchell guided Emma through her testimony with the skill of a surgeon, careful not to lead, but allowing her natural narrative to unfold. "What else did the man say to you, Emma?" he asked gently, knowing that these details would be crucial for establishing the pattern of intimidation that had kept Emma silent for so long. "He told me he knew where I lived," Emma said, her voice trembling but determined. "He said he had been watching our family for weeks, and he knew that Mama worked late at the hospital on Tuesday nights. He knew I walked to school alone on Fridays, when Mama had early meetings. He knew everything about us, and that scared me more than anything. The revelation sent ice-cold fear through Maria Rodriguez's veins. The thought that this monster had been stalking her family, learning their routines and vulnerabilities, was almost too horrifying to comprehend. She realized how calculated and premeditated Cruz's attack had been. This wasn't random violence, but carefully planned predation. Detective Santos felt pieces of the larger puzzle clicking into place as he listened to Emma's testimony. Her description of Cruz's surveillance activities matched the suspicious activity reports they had received from other neighborhoods in the weeks leading up to the attack. This predator had been hunting for the perfect victim, and Rosa Rodriguez's routine of living alone had made her an ideal target. He made me promise not to tell, Emma continued, tears streaming down her face as she relived the psychological torture. He said if I kept my mouth shut like a good little girl, he would forget he ever saw me. But if I told anyone at all, he would come back in the middle of the night and hurt Mama while I watched, just like I watched him hurt Abuela. The courtroom was electric with barely contained outrage, as Emma's testimony revealed the full extent of Cruz's psychological manipulation. Judge Martinez found herself gripping her gavel so tightly her knuckles had turned white, fighting the urge to abandon judicial neutrality and express her horror at what this child had endured. Duke seemed to sense Emma's increasing distress and gently nuzzled her arm, reminding her that she was safe now, that the bad man couldn't hurt her anymore. A simple gesture gave Emma the strength to continue with the most damaging part of her testimony, the details that would seal Cruz's fate forever. Before he left, he took some of Abuela's jewelry and put it in his jacket pocket, Emma said, her voice growing stronger as she recounted the evidence. It was a gold necklace, with a little cross that Abuela wore every day, and some rings that belonged to my great-grandmother. He also took money from the coffee can where Abuela kept her emergency cash, exactly $47 that she had saved from her Social Security check. The specificity of Emma's memory was devastating to the defense. Police had never released details about the exact amount of cash stolen or the specific pieces of jewelry taken. Only the perpetrator and his victim would have known such precise information, and Rosa Rodriguez had been unconscious during most of the attack. Vincent Cruz felt sweat pouring down his back as Emma's testimony systematically destroyed every aspect of his alibi. His attorney had built their defense around the assumption that no credible witness existed, but Emma's detailed recollection was proving to be more reliable than any adult testimony they had ever encountered. When he was leaving, he turned back one more time, Emma said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He pointed at me with his bloody finger and smiled that scary snake smile again. He said, "Remember, little witness, I know where you live, and walls can't protect you from monsters like me." The final threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, explaining perfectly why Emma had retreated into silence for 3 months. The calculated cruelty of terrorizing a child into permanent muteness revealed Cruz not just as a burglar or even a violent criminal, but as a true predator who understood exactly how to destroy innocence and hope. As Emma finished recounting her ordeal, the transformation in the courtroom was palpable. What had begun as a case teetering on the edge of dismissal had become an ironclad prosecution of a monster who had finally been exposed by the courage of a little girl and her unlikely guardian angel. The jury deliberated for exactly 43 minutes, a record for such a complex case, but Emma's devastating testimony had left little room for doubt. As the 12 men and women filed back into the courtroom, their faces carried the weight of the decision they had reached. Foreman Patricia Williams, a retired teacher who had worked with traumatized children for 30 years, clutched the verdict forms with hands that trembled slightly from the emotional intensity of what they had all witnessed. Emma remained in the witness stand with Duke by her side, having refused to leave her newfound protector even after her testimony concluded. Judge Martinez had made the unprecedented decision to allow the police dog to stay, recognizing that separating them now would be cruel beyond measure. The bond that had formed between the traumatized child and the gentle giant had become the foundation of Emma's healing, and everyone understood that Duke's presence was no longer just helpful. It was essential. Vincent Cruz sat at the defense table like a man awaiting execution, his earlier arrogance replaced by the hollow-eyed stare of someone who had finally been caught. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeated slump of his shoulders or the sweat stains that had spread across his shirt during Emma's testimony. Defense attorney Catherine Wells had done her professional best with an impossible case, but even she knew that no legal maneuvering could overcome the power of Emma's truth. As Judge Martinez called the court to order, the packed gallery held its collective breath. Victim advocates, reporters, court staff, and family members all understood they were witnessing something historic, not just the conclusion of a criminal case, but the triumph of a little girl's courage over calculated evil. The media presence had swelled throughout the day as word of Emma's breakthrough spread, with news outlets from across the country sending representatives to cover what was being called the silent witness miracle. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Martinez asked, her voice carrying the gravity of the moment. Foreman Williams stood slowly, her voice clear and strong, despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of aggravated burglary in the first degree, we find the defendant Vincent Cruz guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault of an elderly person, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of intimidating a witness, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of stalking, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers, tears, and applause that Judge Martinez made no immediate effort to control. Justice had been served, and the emotional release was too powerful to contain. Maria Rodriguez collapsed into sobs of relief, while Abuela Rosa raised her weathered hands toward heaven in a gesture of profound gratitude. The nightmare that had consumed their family for months was finally over. Emma, hearing the word guilty, repeated like a healing mantra, looked down at Duke with eyes that sparkled with something that had been missing for 3 months: hope. "We did it, Duke," she whispered, her small voice carrying a strength that amazed everyone who heard it. "A bad man can't hurt anyone else now." Detective Santos felt a satisfaction deeper than any he had experienced in his 20-year career. This case had consumed him, driving him to work 18-hour days, tracking down leads and building evidence around Emma's silence. Seeing Cruz finally face justice validated every sleepless night and every moment of frustration when the case seemed hopeless. Prosecutor Mitchell experienced the kind of professional triumph that reminded him why he had chosen to dedicate his life to seeking justice for victims. This case would define his career, not because of its complexity or legal precedence, but because of the courage of a little girl who had found her voice with the help of an unlikely hero. The victory belonged to Emma and Duke, not to the legal system that had nearly failed them. The sentencing phase brought even more satisfaction to those seeking justice. Judge Martinez, clearly moved by Emma's courage and Cruz's calculated cruelty, handed down the maximum possible sentence under Florida law. "Mr. Cruz," she said, her voice carrying decades of judicial authority, "your crimes against the Rodriguez family represent the worst kind of predatory behavior. You didn't just assault an elderly woman and steal her possessions. You systematically terrorized a child into silence through psychological warfare." Cruz received 45 years in prison without the possibility of parole, effectively. A life sentence for the 53-year-old career criminal. His previous convictions for similar crimes had enhanced the penalties, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to stalk, assault, or terrorize innocent families. The sentence brought closure, not just to the Rodriguez family, but to the families of his previous victims, who had suffered in silence. As the gavel fell for the final time, Emma stood up in the witness chair and hugged Duke with all the strength her small arms could muster. The image of the little girl embracing her canine hero became iconic, captured by photographers and broadcast around the world as a symbol of how healing and justice can emerge from the most unlikely partnerships. Officer Sarah Kim, watching her partner receive love and gratitude beyond anything his training had prepared him for, felt tears streaming down her face. Duke had solved many cases during his career, but this was different. This wasn't about drugs or explosives. This was about healing a broken soul and giving voice to the voiceless. The aftermath brought a flood of media attention that transformed Emma and Duke into symbols of hope for trauma victims everywhere. Their stories sparked national conversations about innovative approaches to helping child witnesses, the therapeutic value of animal-assisted interventions, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of calculated evil. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Emma refused to leave Duke's side. Judge Martinez, moved by their bond, made arrangements for the police dog to accompany Emma home that night. The little girl who had entered the courthouse 3 days earlier, trapped in silence, was leaving as a hero, her voice restored and her spirit beginning to heal, all thanks to the gentle giant who had seen past her trauma to the brave soul within. 1 year later, Emma Rodriguez stood confidently in front of a packed auditorium at Miami Children's Hospital, her voice clear and strong as she addressed a room full of trauma counselors, child psychologists, and law enforcement officers. Beside her, as always, sat Duke, now officially retired from active police duty and serving as Emma's permanent therapy companion. The transformation in both of them was nothing short of miraculous, but their real magic lay in how they had transformed the lives of countless other children struggling to find their voices after trauma. Before I met Duke, I thought I would never speak again, Emma told the audience, her 9-year-old voice carrying wisdom far beyond her years. The bad man's threats lived in my head like monsters, telling me that talking would bring more hurt to my family. But Duke showed me that some protectors have 4 legs and kind eyes, and they can chase away the monsters that words can't touch. The Emma Rodriguez Foundation, established 6 months after the trial, had already helped over 200 children across Florida find their voices through innovative animal-assisted therapy programs. What started as one little girl's breakthrough had evolved into a revolutionary approach to treating childhood trauma that was being studied and replicated across the nation. Dr. Susan Chun, now the Foundation's chief therapeutic officer, had documented remarkable success rates that were reshaping how the medical community approached selective mutism and trauma-induced silence. Duke, now 5 years old, and bearing the wisdom of a dog who had seen both the darkest and brightest sides of human nature, had become the cornerstone of the Foundation's therapy program. His gentle intelligence and uncanny ability to connect with traumatized children had helped heal wounds that traditional therapy alone could not reach. Veterinary behaviorists studied Duke's intuitive responses to distressed children, trying to understand the mysterious bond that allowed him to reach souls that had retreated into protective silence. The Rodriguez family home had transformed into an unexpected sanctuary of healing. Maria had reduced her nursing hours to help coordinate the Foundation's activities, while Abuela Rosa, fully recovered from her physical injuries, had become the program's beloved grandmother figure. Her weathered hands, once victims of violence, now gently guided other elderly trauma survivors through their own healing journeys. The house that had once echoed with silence and fear now rang with laughter, hope, and the voices of children rediscovering their power to speak. The legal ramifications. of Emma and Duke's partnership had extended far beyond their individual case. The Emma Protocol had been adopted by courts in 12 states, establishing guidelines for incorporating therapy animals into proceedings involving child witnesses. Law schools now taught courses on innovative victim advocacy, using Emma's case as a prime example of how the justice system could evolve to better serve its most vulnerable participants. Detective Miguel Santos, promoted to captain after his exemplary work on the Cruz case, had spearheaded the Miami-Dade Police Department's new Victim Services K-9 unit. Inspired by Duke's success, the department now trained specialized therapy dogs to work specifically with traumatized witnesses and victims. Santos often spoke at law enforcement conferences, sharing how Duke's breakthrough with Emma had revolutionized their approach to sensitive investigations. Officer Sarah Kim had found her true calling in the specialized field of victim services. After witnessing Duke's extraordinary ability to heal trauma, she had pursued additional training in animal-assisted therapy and now oversaw the department's expanding K-9 therapy program. Her partnership with Duke had evolved beyond traditional police work into something that touched the very essence of healing and hope. Vincent Cruz, serving his life sentence at Florida State Prison, had become a case study in criminal psychology programs across the country. His calculated use of psychological terrorism against a child had led to enhanced penalties for witness intimidation involving minors. The monster who had tried to silence Emma forever had inadvertently sparked legal reforms that would protect countless future victims. The ripple effects of Emma's courage continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted. Children's hospitals nationwide had implemented animal therapy programs based on the Emma Duke model. Universities studied their bond as part of broader research into the healing power of human-animal connections. International conferences on childhood trauma featured their story as a beacon of hope for recovery and resilience. Emma's dreams of becoming a lawyer had crystallized into a determined life goal. She spent afternoons at Prosecutor Mitchell's office, learning about the legal system that had initially failed her, but ultimately delivered justice. Mitchell, who had become like a surrogate uncle to Emma, often marveled at how this little girl had taught him more about courage than 20 years of courtroom experience. On quiet Sunday afternoons, Emma and Duke could be found in their favorite spot, the small garden behind their house where Abuela Rosa grew flowers in memory of the innocence that was lost and found again. Emma would read to Duke from law, books she was still too young to fully understand, while he listened with the patient attention of a friend who knew that dreams nurtured with love and determination could overcome any obstacle. The scar-shaped moon that had once marked Vincent Cruz's face lived now only in memories, while the real moon that Emma and Duke watched together each night symbolized the cycles of healing, hope, and renewal. Emma's voice, once stolen by fear, had become a chorus that inspired thousands of other silent children to believe that their words mattered, their stories deserved to be heard, and their healing was possible. As Emma concluded her presentation at the hospital, the standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. But the real applause came from Duke, whose tail wagged with the pride of a partner who knew their work was far from over. Together, they had proven that sometimes the most powerful justice comes not from courtrooms or laws, but from the simple courage to speak truth in the presence of unconditional love. Their legacy would live forever in every child who found their voice, every family that discovered healing, and every heart that learned that hope can wear a fur coat and speak in the language of gentle eyes and steadfast friendship.